Hi, this is Nicole Rivera, and you're listening to the Stop Writing Alone podcast. This week, I have another interview of one of my happy campers. And Jackie Dana has been with the Happy Campers Club from day one, even a little bit before. She's been writing in the writing prompt parties, I feel like, since they kind of launched, and has been a great support to me on the back end of things while building all things Stop Writing Alone, Happy Campers, and my own fiction. But what Jackie's been doing in her writing life is leaping out into a brand new world of exploring various new platforms, specifically with an eye on serialized storytelling. So you may have heard about Kindle Vella from Amazon that launched over the summer. Jackie had her story, The Favor Fairies, out there on the day of launch. She's also been using Substack, which is I don't want to say a brand new platform, but it's new to me, so it feels like a brand new platform that Jackie will do a great job of explaining further in the interview, where it's a space where she's able to connect with her readers through a newsletter, but she is also going to be bringing her serialized fiction to that space as well. These are exciting spaces to be learning about, hearing about, potentially a home for your writing, not only to reach your readers, but to also monetize your writing right here on the internet and be in control of it all. So it's really my pleasure to introduce Jackie Dana, or reintroduce Jackie Dana to you if you have heard her in previous episodes where we talked about the Happy Campers, or perhaps you've watched some of our writing prompt parties where Jackie has written live with us. But this time we're going to talk all these things, all about where Jackie's fiction is now, all about her experiences with writing community in Happy Campers and beyond, all the way back to when she was an ML for her local NaNoWriMo group. We've got it all. It's a long episode. I was really debating over whether or not I should split it into two, but it's all here for you to decide if you're going to sit back and listen to the whole thing at once, or let this wonderful conversation take you through all the way to next week until you get your next Happy Camper interview. But here she is, Jackie Dana and I, talking about all things writing, writing community, and not writing alone. Jackie, welcome, and thank you for joining me today.
Hello. Thank you for having a chat.
Yes, this is going to be pretty exciting. So let's just start off by letting people know, what are you working on right now? What is inspiring you in your writing and your creativity at this moment?
Well, I am working on a few projects that are all interrelated. I am, as of May, I started a Substack newsletter, which is a multi-pronged approach to life. On the newsletter, like every week, I have like the standard newsletter, but being that it's on Substack, it's more of an article, and I write about. It's called Story Cauldron, and I write about things having to do with storytelling, or as I say, like the quirky places that we find story in like everyday life. So I've talked about like TV and music, and I've talked about a few other things like microfiction, like graffiti or things like that. But I also share some of my short stories, and I talk about some of my experiences in various things. One of the things that has then translated to is, well, I should actually back up and say, I also on my Substack, I write fiction. And if you're a paid member, you can follow along with a serial novel that I'm writing. The first one's just completed. It's the series is called the Favor Fairies, and the concept is teenagers are going to these fairies that exist in these different places to make wishes, and you take a little snack and you take a little trinket and you make a small wish. It can't be like I want $1 million. It's more like, I want to pass my test or something, and you might get your wish to come true. And so the teenagers are doing this, and I decided to set the whole thing in St. Louis. And the way the world works is they go to these different places that show up on a map, like parks and things. And so because I'm in St. Louis, I started going to look at these places to have better, settings. And as I did that, I started wanting to learn more about places. So in the newsletter, all ties back to the newsletter, is I'm starting to write about some of the places I'm finding in St. Louis. And it started with this bridge that I'm literally driving down the road, going to a park, for scene research. And I look over my shoulder, like out for whatever off to the side, not over my shoulder, and I see this little bridge down below the bridge I'm crossing. And I'm like, what is that? And it took me a whole bunch of driving around and then Google Maps to even figure out how to get down to the bridge. And it's this 1925 truss bridge in the middle of this industrial zone. And I'm like, what? But it's on a public road. And I'm like, what is this? So I started looking into it, and that's opened up all kinds of crazy stuff. And so I've made that bridge an integral part of the second book that I've just finished writing that's going to be on my Substack soon. But now I'm wanting to research more about it. And so my newsletter talks about stories, and it has my novel, but now I have a third component that comes up every so often, which I'm calling Unseen St. Louis, where I'm going to talk about some of the history of St. Louis. And this bridge is sort of literally, as well as figuratively, kind of that bridge to all of the things. So it ties together my newsletter and my novel and St. Louis and all the history. And so it's been a really fun project, because the novel has opened up all these things, and then my nonfiction is opening up things, and they're all kind of working together on my newsletter.
I mean, it all makes sense, right? You're talking about a story cauldron, and you have your stories that you're creating, but the stories of the land around you and the landmarks around you and how they're feeding into what you're creating next. I'm loving it. And I'll just say to the audience, if anyone hasn't stumbled upon a story cauldron article yet, they're always filled with like such value and really just such great information and insight on the aspects of story. From when you started and you were just talking about the idea of serialized novels and where they are today, but where we've been seeing them throughout history. I think that was really insightful, particularly like with this whole new trend, quote unquote new trend in serialized fiction. It was really fun to harken back. There was one part of the article where you're like, where you've already read serialized but probably didn't even realize it. And it's so true. This is an age-old thing that's been going on. So I just want to give the audience a little bit of insight about this term that we're throwing around, Substack. This is a platform. Is it a new platform? It's not really like brand new, right?
Not new. It's been around for, I guess, at least a couple of years. I'm not even sure how. I want to say it's at least 2 years, maybe 3 years old.
Okay, but definitely like new to us. Like we sort of just started hearing the name trickle around.
It's really, I think, been around for a little while, but only gotten any traction and people paying attention to it over the past year. Maybe.
Right.
There's been a few people like Heather Cox Richardson, who writes history, sort of historical analysis of every day. She started with, like kind of a political analysis, and now it's kind of expanded out a little bit. And she publishes it on Substack and also on Facebook. And I think she was one of the people that I noticed it first. And then a few other named, kind of big name people started doing that. And I think that's where it started catching on. And what's interesting about it is, unlike a lot of platforms, to publish a newsletter on Substack, it's completely free.
Right.
Anybody can go there, and it's kind of like Medium, but with a newsletter that's integrated into it. So you're writing something that then gets pushed out to a subscriber list, but it also exists as like a blog post. But that's entirely free.
Right.
The only time you pay money is you can, it's like optional to have a paid component to it. And if you charge money for any or all of your newsletter, then Substack takes a percentage of that.
Okay.
So it's there's no, $10 monthly charge or anything like so many platforms.
Right.
So I think a lot of people are like, why not try it? Because it's a newsletter that's free and there's not a lot of those options out there.
Yeah.
So
And we're definitely going to have like a more in-depth talk about this, but I do want to just mention that it's like been said that it's a more writer friendly
Yep.
platform and path to monetization than say Patreon, which everyone knows Patreon is this great space to connect with followers, to connect with fans, and figure out that crowdsourcing monetization point, but it doesn't have a great space for writing. You kind of have to direct your fans to someplace else. One of the great appeals of Substack seems to be that you can design that monetization, like you said, and it's also the place where people go to get your writing. So it's not like you're sending people all over the place.
Right. Well, what appealed to me is I've been trying to do a newsletter for years and I could never get one going. It was always a hassle. I was using MailChimp, which I just despise. I don't, like the interface at all. And it was always like the template and what am I doing here and how do I make this header? And it was just, it was counterproductive to writing. But I also, the idea of saying, okay, so everybody, this is what I'm doing this week. I'm like, I didn't find that compelling.
Right.
And I didn't find that sort of,
That
update
personal,
on my life
yeah, right.
that interesting. And I mean, some people have really interesting lives and, you or make them interesting, but that's just not my writing style. I'm not like a personal essayist. So I never really could write that way. And when I saw Substack and I thought about it and saw some of what people are doing, they were writing articles. They were writing about something they cared about and sharing it with people who maybe wanted to read it rather than following me, Jackie Dana. They were following a concept.
Right.
I want to read about this thing written by Jackie Dana. So like my identity is part of it, but it's not just about me.
Right. And it's a good place to showcase your writing.
Right.
Just your writing, not necessarily your life story, which is, and that, I think it's great that you're mentioning this because I do feel like many writers are being pushed right now to create a platform, to
Right.
get out there. Definitely newsletters are all the rage right now. And it does get to the point where people are thinking, well, what the heck would I write my newsletter about? Do I have to keep telling people what happened to me this week? What did I eat for dinner on Wednesday? Like, who wants to hear all that? Or am I stuck just doing writing tips, talking about the writing of my novel? I love what you've done with Story Cauldron in that you've said, I'm here, I'm going to show up for you. You're going to get to know me, but through this topic that we have a shared interest in. It's a really great, I mean, to go back to, it's a great bridge to, like you guys love story. I love story. By the way, when you're done reading this, I've also been writing stories. If you want to come purchase them, they're over this way. Come with me. Perfect. It's a whole new option for writers who, so many fiction writers are like, I don't want to write about nonfiction, my life and the memoir aspect of it. So yeah, I'm loving it all.
Well, and what I like about it is that the platform itself is very streamlined. It's very simple and basic. You don't have a lot of formatting. You don't have a lot of layout options. They could actually, wouldn't hurt to do a little bit more. Like you can only do one big picture, like you can't like have pictures next to each other or some little things like that. But otherwise, it's very streamlined. So you really, it's really about focusing on the writing, and they make it really easy to drop in buttons or whatever, to subscribe to me, so you don't have to be super techy to do all that. And it allows people to tell their stories, whatever that is. So like I say, I just decided, let's try this. This seems more my speed. And I wasn't really sure what to write. So I started doing the Story Cauldron thing. And then Kindle Vella popped up out of nowhere. And that is the new Amazon serial novel platform. And I had a project kind of in my back pocket that I didn't know what to do with. And I thought this will be perfect for Kindle Vella. So I finished it up and packaged it up and started publishing it, getting it ready to publish there. And then I was in a group of Substack writers who were talking about doing fiction. And I thought, why not just serialize it in both places simultaneously?
Right. Yeah.
So I did that. And the Vela experiment has been interesting, but isn't really where I feel like I want to put my effort moving forward. So for my second book, it's just going to be on Substack. And there's a bunch of us that are trying this whole serial novel thing on Substack. And since we started working on it, they have announced Salman Rushdie is doing it and Chuck Palahniuk's doing it,
Right.
serializing stories or novels. I don't even know what they're writing for the platform, but it's now being seen as a potential place to write fiction and share
Yeah.
fiction. And different people are doing it different ways. Some people are doing it all for free. Some people are doing it all for paid. Some are doing it kind of as a mix. But it's still an experimental thing and nobody knows if it's going to work or not. But for me, I already have a handful of dedicated readers who are willing to pay me to read it. And I figure the way it'll work is I'll write these stories. And once I'm done with each one, as I've just completed the first one, as I'm making them an ebook, which paid subscribers can download. So it's like buying the book. And then eventually, once I have 3 or 4 of them written, sometime probably next year, I'm going to publish them over on Amazon. And I have my mailing list, which is my main Substack list. And I can say, hey, my first book's coming out on Amazon next month. Pre-order it here, like you would with a traditional author newsletter.
Absolutely.
So the vast majority of my subscribers are never going to be paid subscribers, but they might be willing to buy my ebook or something on Amazon in a year.
Yes.
And so and then hopefully some of those people will go, wow, this is great. I want to read the next one early.
Yes.
And then they'll become a paid subscriber on my paid Substack. And what I'm hoping is that it becomes this sort of, I don't know, the sort of machine of, bring people in, which is the way a newsletter is supposed to work, right?
Exactly.
You bring people in who want to follow you, then you tell them when you've got a book and they buy your book, and but then I have them hooked into maybe the paid, which sounds very mercenary, and I don't mean it to sound mercenary. It's a way to build a platform, and it's a way to.
Well, the way I see it, Jackie, is that it's a path to finding your people. Right. Exactly. This is so you got we all have the entire universe is out there. And we can scream out to all of them, I have a book. I have a book. Are you interested? And everybody's going to be like, what? Stop screaming. Or you can just go on the hunt for your people, the people that speak your soul language, which is story, and start connecting with them as you're doing here with Story Cauldron, and just having that regular conversation, and then just saying, by the way, I have a book now. And I know that you've been enjoying this so far. Here's something that you can buy. To me, I always think of the metaphor as being like that we are salespeople and we can have a storefront or we can do door-to-door sales. And I feel like when we do the inbox, it's kind of like we do door-to-door sales, that we're going to someone's house, we're ringing the doorbell. But the newsletter is us being friends. We're showing up at the door and saying, hey, Jackie, how you doing today? It's great to see you again. I was just learning this whole thing about my local space here in St. Louis. Did you see this bridge? And we're just having a chat. And then, I'll come and have this chat with you every week, and we're just hanging out, having coffee. And then once a year I say, Jackie, it's great to see you again. By the way, here's my book that I have to buy. And we're already like buds now. It's not me just ringing the doorbell. Hi, I have a book to sell. Are you interested? It's like, no, it's Nicole. She's been here all week with the newsletter.
Well, so that's the way, any fan base of anything is ideally going to be built, right? Nobody's going to buy, whoever's next album or next book if they don't know anything about them. And if they don't, there's got to be some relationship somewhere. Maybe it's a friend, suggesting it, but there's got to be something. And what I'm hoping is that for the people who are on Substack reading my novels in the sort of, the special subscriber room, I'm also really hoping I can build up some relationships with those people, like publishing the chapters and give me feedback, or, is there something you like to see, or here's some cool little insight on why I created this or something. that I can get a little bit of interaction and engagement there. And that will make the people who are paying feel special, that they're getting something nobody else in the world is getting. They
Right.
get to contribute to the world, maybe in some ways. They get to contribute to where it goes. I'm writing a whole new fairy world for the third book. I mean, we see a little of it in 2, but we'll see a lot more of it in 3. And I would love for people to give me ideas on what might happen or what it might look like, like, why
Yeah.
not? I mean,
Right.
this is a complete fantasy. So, is there a type of character that I don't have that I should have or
Mm,
something, like, you don't have anybody that does this. And in every fairy story I've ever read, I
right.
go, oh, hey, that's a great idea, right?
Yeah.
So I can have that. And again, as an author, you want those, what do they call them? It's like true fans, but there's another word for it. I can't think of what it is, but you want those people who are going to be like the ones that'll buy everything and do everything.
It's well,
And
I mean,
tell
in
everybody.
all
And that's the way to
of
foster that.
the creative industry, we call it the first followers. The
Right.
first followers are very, very faithful. They come, like there's a video on YouTube. I'll put the link in the show description, but it's why first followers is so powerful. And it's a video of a guy dancing on the side of a hill.
Oh yeah.
And everybody's looking at him, and it's crazy, like this big, they're out at a park. And he's just dancing on his own, but then this other person stands up and starts dancing next to him. And that person then starts to encourage the rest of, it's a really fun video to watch because you see everybody suddenly fall in, and it's a big, huge dance party. The guy that started the dance couldn't do it on his own. He was dancing and everybody was just like, that guy's nuts. But then the first guy that got up, and the first, couple that got up to dance alongside him, they were the ones that sort of got the party started. So that's who you have behind the paywall. When those people come through, they are the first followers that are going to say to friends and everything, come check this out. You got to come on up here and join the dance with me.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's a really powerful model that you have here. And it's really exciting to watch you jump into this whole experiment, first with Kindle Vella, now with Substack. And what's really interesting for me is rewinding to when we first met, which is, I would say, like, was it the beginning of 2020?
Yeah.
Right when I was about to start the 52 prompts in 52 weeks. I think is Swap 52. We kind of connected there, and then you came into Happy Campers, and I found out that you had been published. You have a book published, and you've been in this state of I keep writing, but I'm not ready to take it to the next step. I'm thinking about what I've done before and all of the work that goes into it. How did you go from that space to experimental Jackie you're just out there? And this is like what I wanted for you back then, but I didn't even know how to translate it. And it's really wonderful to see you being at the forefront of all this and turning to other writers and saying, you can do this too. So
I think there's a few things that helped. Having the writing community obviously really matters, right? Having people who are writing that encourage you and that kind of keep you going, and that helped a lot. That was well before I was getting feedback from anybody.
Yeah.
And I think the writing every week, the writing prompt parties, the writing prompts that you would do on the videos and all the different things. What started happening was I wasn't writing a short story every single week, but what I was doing was completing short stories on a regular basis.
Okay.
And what I was really having a hard time with coming into 2020, pandemic aside, had nothing to do with pandemic,
Right. It was pre-pandemic. We didn't know what was about to go down.
Right, exactly. But where I was really struggling was with kind of completing stories and finding the path all the way through them. It wasn't that I just didn't want to complete them or I would just abandon things and start, like a lot of people will have that problem. my problem wasn't so much that I was abandoning them. It was that I was having a hard time finding the path all the way.
Finding it. Yeah.
I was struggling with story structure. I was struggling with confidence. I had a I had finished the book and gotten it out there, but then I was having some real issues in like the few years previous of watching all of my friends publishing book after book after book, and I wasn't able to complete one, and what was wrong with me. And I mean, it was an imposter syndrome, but it was also, there was confidence, and I was really struggling with a lot of different things, and story structure was part of it. And I'd been working on it, but I still hadn't quite found my way through. And writing short stories really helped. Oh, wow, okay, I can do this. And, I submitted some and got some, got some good feedback from some different places on those. And I think what was probably the best were the story prompt parties, where for anybody who doesn't know, we would have some sort of random prompt, and then we would all sit on the video and we would write the story live right there with each other and then share them. And at first I was terrified, but then it was like, oh, this isn't so bad. Even incomplete stories or problematic stories, I would get good feedback and good, like maybe I'm onto something here. And it really helped, I don't know, in a way restore my faith in my writing. And, maybe it's not, because before I was so precious, and I think a lot of people are when they start, they're very precious about their writing and they don't want anybody to see it until it's absolutely perfect.
Right.
And that absolutely perfect position is really hard to reach. And if you strive for absolute perfection, you'll never get anywhere. And so doing those writing prompt parties really helped me get over that in a lot of ways.
Right.
And, almost perfect is good enough, right? A complete story sometimes is good enough. So I think what that did was, then when we did the 3-day novel contest in August, which a bunch of us in the group participated in, I wrote this thing that didn't suck. It wasn't done, but it didn't suck. And when I had an opportunity to do something with it, and I had like a few weeks to turn it around, I was like, I can do good enough. Like, if you read the story that is now quote unquote published in ebook form on my Substack, it isn't perfect. I can point to places which I could have probably done a little bit better here or there. If it went through a really rigorous editing process, it would be a different story. But I think it's good enough. And I think it's really good. It's, it's just not my brain's version of perfect. So I don't mean to say it's a faulty book.
No, but Jackie, I even wrote perfect. It down here when you said almost perfect is good enough, because I would venture to say that almost every author, if you ask them about their published book, and I'm talking about all the way up the chain, they would say, yeah, that one was almost perfect. But if I take it off the shelf right now, I'm going to find places that I could have done something different, that I could have, an editor missed a thing that I can't believe they missed, or what have you. You hear the story in so many different interviews with authors, and it is so true. We all have this perception of what perfection should be. But I do believe that the authors that have their books on the shelves are the ones that have relinquished just enough to say, it's got to get out of my hands and go at almost perfect. And yes, our almost perfect is a sliding scale and can get closer and closer to perfect. And maybe you still see a place where you could have slid it a little bit more, but it's out there. We've been reading it. People can read it now, and you're moving forward with it. It's amazing. It's really that perfectionism bit, I think, holds so many of our hands when it comes to getting stuff out there. So
yeah, I think, I look at my first book and how many times I rewrote it and how many times I went through it and tweaked each phrase and each sentence and each this and that. And I didn't have the time with this one. And
right.
I think what I learned is that all these friends of mine, where I got so hung up at all these people that were publishing novel after novel, weren't worrying about all these tweaks. They were just
Right.
getting the story out there. And I think there is definitely a sweet spot between writing a book a month and publishing it in whatever form and spending 5 years on a novel, right? Like,
Right.
I think I can write better than somebody who's just churning them out. And I'm not naming names or specific because there's some people who can do that probably quite well, but I think you lose some quality by, trying to do things very quickly. Um,
Well,
but the
there's even just knowing yourself that's like you can operate
right,
at that
right,
level.
exactly.
Like that while that may work for X, Y, and Z authors, I'm not going to be able to show up to churn up what is quality work in a month.
On a timetable where you're doing things very quickly, I don't think the quality is the highest priority. I think that's my basic point.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think you can write faster with some quality if you aren't concerned with it being the next, Pulitzer Prize or not Nobel Prize winning novel or whatever.
Right. Right. Yeah.
If you're not looking for it to be, I mean, I have no pretension that I'm going to be the next Hugo Award winning author. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll win a huge award someday. I'm not saying it's not possible, but I'm not worrying about this has to be the best book ever.
Right.
Right.
This like, one right now doesn't have to be.
I just want to write stories and share them with people. And I want them to be good enough that people want to read them and that they don't want to throw them across the room. Right. Like, wow, that was a really dumb plot, or those characters were really flat. Like, I don't want that to happen. But is this award-winning brilliance? I don't know. I don't know that really matters to me. I would rather.
I was going to say it's not that it has to be. Not every story has to be that. Some stories are out to entertain the reader. You are there and you're taking your readers on a journey. And I mean that is the award, right? If some reader comes back to you and says like, I lived that, I felt that, I was there, take me again, like go write more stories. That's the beautiful thing.
And I think that was the other thing that I had to learn is that they don't, like I say, they don't have to be perfect, but if your goal is you want people to read them and enjoy them and you want to share them, then holding them tight for
then
years,
they have to get out there, right?
Get out there. So
right.
Now the plan is I've got book 2 that is nearly done. I'm going to be launching it in a couple of weeks on Substack. It's called The Boy Who Can Taste Color. And basically one of the characters in my first novel, his older stepbrother has always been a bully, and he flunks out of college and he comes back to live with him, and Holden just can't cope. So it's like, I just really wish he would just disappear. And like, he would just leave, like go somewhere. And he does disappear, like literally. And nobody knows what's happened to him. And so the rest of the book is him trying to figure out what he's done and try to undo because he's like, he wanted him to go away, but he didn't want him to just vanish.
But not like that.
And it's fun because, I'm doing things with storytelling that I don't see other writers doing. I'm breaking some of the rules, and this isn't the standard fairy novel at all. I would very intentionally wanted to write something that didn't follow the standard fairy tropes. Cool. There's a few of the tropes, and the fairies aren't Tinkerbell. They're like the little Favor Fairies are kind of, not that big deal, but there's fairies that are, and we'll learn more about them. And there's witches involved, and there's politics involved. And I also really hate the idea of evil and good and evil characters. So Holden has some really big problems. His brother has problems, but they also have things that are good about them. And there's witches involved that are like on two different sort of sides of things. And it's like, which side is the right side?
Right.
And, so there's a lot of questions that'll start coming out. And I like writing things that are kind of ambiguous like that on a moral sort of basis.
Yeah.
So I'm almost done with that, and that'll go up live in a couple of weeks. We'll start it trickling out chapters by chapters. And then I'll be writing book 3 for NaNoWriMo in November. And hopefully we'll have that done in time for when book 2, I don't know how many chapters I ultimately have. I haven't counted them. yet. So it'll be really interesting to see if I have time to finish that book before I have time.
Right.
But that's kind of part of this process now, is I have readers who want the book. So I only have so much time. So it's not going to be written in a month and published, but it's not going to be written in 2 years and published. Right. There's that accountability of that and that timetable. And I don't know how that's going to work for me long term, but my goal is to have at least 4 books done, so that because the 4th one is, I've already kind of written parts of. I'm going to kind of pull it apart, but I'm hoping to have all 4 of these done by maybe this time next year, give or take. That I can then publish them as a books, boom, 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 on Amazon, which is, as an author, the best way to get new readers is you publish them and then you do some promotions on your first book or your second book or whatever, and you bring people into the world and then they buy the whole
shebang.
series.
Yeah.
So, and then, like I say, hopefully then some of them will subscribe to my Substack, and maybe a year from now I will have,
starting something new,
bigger, audience. And do I continue with this series or do I do something else? I don't know. I also have the second book in my previous series that is almost done, which I probably will work on as soon as I'm done with book 3, because at that point I should have a little bit of breathing room to get that published and then finish up book 4. So like a whole big plan, a whole little factory.
I mean, I've been watching you all along, like building the plan and everything, and it's inspiring. It's amazing. It's really great to see it like unrolling now. It was like earlier in this, I guess it was in the spring, it was all these ideas, and now it's happening, and it's
no idea what I was going to be doing. Even in May, when I started my Substack, I had no idea. I just I should do something. Let me try this newsletter idea. And it was really only with the announcement of Kindle Vella that lit a fire under my feet, because I was like, I can do that.
And you wanted to be ready for the launch.
Right. And, before that, I had no plans to publish anything. I had no plans to write a series. I had written book 2 of this series for Nano last year, but it wasn't even complete. And I was just like, I keep writing books that aren't complete, and I move on, or I don't know what to do with them. And there was no real motivation to complete them either. And now there's motivation, and now there's people reading them, which is really fun. And to anybody who's listening, who has never had an actual audience, large or small, reading their stuff, it's really fun, and it is something,
game changer,
to aspire to. And that doesn't mean you have to have been writing for 15 years. I mean, if this is your first year of writing, you can still start building fans. They may be a small number initially because you haven't written enough, but
I think that's the great appeal.
Different thing.
I think that's the great
author. I mean, being an actor and having no audience, why do you want to act if you have no audience? The same with writing a book. Writing a book and having nobody read it, it's kind of missing something.
I think that's the great appeal of spaces like Wattpad, where we'd see a lot of young writers leaping on and putting their writing out into the world. And they're very early on, or even AO3, with fan fiction, that early on, there are many young authors that came into this world with the internet by their side and got readers immediately. But I love that you are finding spaces for writers to do that and get paid. That's the whole thing, is that there is that one phase of getting your words out there and getting the value of readers, but then there's also, getting the monetary kickback also for all the work that you're doing is wonderful. So Jackie, you have mentioned earlier about you had this other group of writing friends that everybody was starting to publish very quickly. And I know that you've been sort of in lots of different writing communities over the years. How did that click for you, that you knew you needed to be around other writers? Is there a point where you were writing alone, or did you always have some aspect of community around you?
Well, I've been writing fiction my entire adult life, which is multiple decades now. And up until really when I did Nano the first time in 2013, I had never written with anybody, around anybody, for anybody. I just did it on my own. And when I did Nano the first time, I was scared to death to
Mm.
go to the kickoff meeting. I was in Austin, and Austin, Texas, pre-pandemic had really big kickoff parties. And I was scared to death, but I was like, I'm doing this thing. I don't know what I'm doing. I signed up for Nano like in October. So I was like, I'll just go and see what I can get out of it. And I met all these really cool people and just loved it. And it was part of like the forums and went to write-ins. And I was like, this is a different thing. And
Yeah.
it was really fun to get to meet writers and talk about what they were writing and be part of a writing community. And it was the first time I'd ever done that. And so that grew into me being a NaNoWriMo municipal liaison and creating an organization for a year-round writing activities and interaction. And that was great. And I had a lot of friends who we would write together. We would go to coffee shops. We would have retreats, and we do all kinds of things. But around the time that I published my first book, I got involved in the indie author community of people who self-publish on Amazon. And there were a couple of conferences that were held in Austin, the Smarter Artist Summits, and I met a whole bunch more people that weren't even local who were in the process of publishing books, because most of the people I knew from Nano were just writers. They didn't know
Right.
what they were doing with anything. They just wrote, half-heartedly in many cases, right? Like they'd write 1 month a year or something.
1 month, right.
And then I would meet all these people through Smarter Artists and through some other things and online who were publishing books multiple times a year, or in some cases literally every month to 6 weeks. And there were so many of them, and some of them had started, like Michael Anderle, who's known for this. He published his first novel when I published mine. And I
Mm.
met him a few months later, and he had already published a couple more and was doing really well, but it was no
Wow.
big deal at the time.
Yeah.
But then a year out, seeing how successful he was and how many people were following him and all these other people that were doing it. And here I am still with one book done, right?
Right.
And no real plans or ability to get the
Well,
second one
what
off.
one
You
of
know,
my favorite quotes from Teddy Roosevelt is comparison is the thief of joy, right?
yeah,
And it's really hard to resist it in a situation like that where you say we both started
yeah,
together, and it's so hard to like, because you almost have to forget that. You have to like move on and forget that, and you can't forget it sometimes.
right. So I started watching all these people, and a lot of people that I knew, and they were just writing book after book. Were they good books? I don't know. I haven't read them. What was their life like? How did they put it together? I don't know. In hindsight, I know that some people probably, because a lot of them had day jobs, and they were probably putting 8 hours a day into their writing, to get it done, and forsaking everything else. And I
Right.
was never willing to do that. But it was still hard to be in that position of, why can't I even finish one book?
Yeah.
And it got to the point where I literally kind of froze. I had to leave all the groups. I couldn't follow anybody anymore. I'm not in any of the indie author groups anymore, because it became so paralyzing to me. And so
Mm.
for a short while, a year or two, I just was just trying to get my head together and figure out what I was doing. And it was really just finding Stop Writing Alone and finding writers who were kind of where I am. They weren't necessarily beginning writers who wrote just during Nano, but they weren't also the kind of people who were publishing once a month and
Right.
living, fully on their writing or their novel income. And so it was like, a group of people at different levels, and that, I could write with and not feel like I was a failure.
Yeah.
And I mean, that sounds really dumb to say on some level, like, why would you feel like a failure if, you've got a book out and but it was really, it did a real big trip on my mind. And I would, I would really caution anybody who is interested in going that path not to dive too deeply into the indie publishing world until they're really ready to be there. As
Mm.
one of my friends and mentors told me, you don't worry about marketing until you have written the book. And I mean, you can think about like, who's your audience or whatever, but beyond that, you don't worry about where are you selling it? How are you doing your marketing? You don't worry about all of those pieces and your cover and everything else. Don't worry about it until you've got a book, because otherwise it can really undermine your confidence. It can freak you out. It can give you too many things to worry about. And that was my problem, is I put the marketing and the big picture behind, or ahead of the writing. And, will this book be good enough? And will people buy it? And is it gonna, I can't even tell you all the things that would go through my head, which really prevented me from finishing things.
From actually, I love what you just said, the advice that you gave to everybody, that just not to go there until you're ready for it. And it's not to vilify this fraction of the writing community. It's just that we all have our right space, our right time, and our right people. That's always my whole thing, is that I'm always trying to encourage people to find their people. That's my whole thing with Stop Writing Alone, is that I might not be your people, but somewhere out there is your people. What encouraged you to keep looking after you were in the state of, feeling paralyzed and you were not following the other writing group anymore? What helped you still say, I still want writing community after that?
Well, first off, I agree with you. I mean, I don't mean to vilify the indie author groups. I mean, 20 books to 50K on Facebook is probably the best place you could ever be if you want to be an indie author. But submerging yourself in that kind of environment, if you're still writing your novel, can be detrimental. Maybe not to everybody.
Like you said, depending on where you are at, it might not be the healthiest mindset for you to be in yet.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, once I get my books done, as I had described earlier, and I'm ready to get them all out there, I'm going to probably join everything up and do all my research on what is the current algorithm on Amazon, and how often do you need to publish, and all that kind of stuff. I'll worry about that later. I'm not worrying about that now. I know that generally speaking, having a series is better than a single book, and that's all I need to know right now. But to answer your specific question about the groups, I didn't know I needed it really. I just knew that I was determined to figure my way out of the hole I had made, which was in large part I was really struggling with story structure and getting stuck in the middle to the 2/3 way around the break between Act 2 and Act 3. I just got lost. And so I'd been working with my friend in Austin with a lot of that. And I had, Save the Cat Writes a Novel is amazing for that. And so I've been working on all that kind of stuff on my own. But I moved from Austin to St. Louis, and I have no writing community here. So that was one of the things. I don't have to go have coffee with in St. Louis, really. I mean, that are writers.
That's right.
And so, I was starting to try to do that. I was going to a local write-in group, and, I did a NaNoWriMo here in 2019. And I was starting to kind of get there, and then the pandemic happened.
Right.
So that really shortcut. So the Happy Campers group came around at a great time, because it was like, well, I'm not going to be going anywhere anyway.
Right.
So this is perfect. I think had the pandemic not happened, my history with Happy Campers might have been different. I think a lot of people might
I think all of us,
have needed it.
Yeah.
But it came at the right time. And because I had recently moved, I mean, I had literally only lived in St. Louis a year when the pandemic hit and when Happy Camper started.
Right.
Like, literally to the month, I had just moved here a year previously. So I had not had a chance to build any of that. So, I believe that things happen for a reason. And at least for me, the moving and the pandemic combined really helped. Had I been in Austin when the pandemic hit, I think it would have been much more devastating, because I wouldn't have been able to do the things that I had been doing.
Yeah.
Here, everything was new and different, and I had to reinvent myself. And so,
you hadn't gotten a chance.
Yeah.
find the stuff that you were going to miss
Right.
during the pandemic.
Exactly. And I would still like to, find a good writing community that works for me here.
Of course. Yeah.
But, that's still not really something I'm looking for because I'm still relatively isolating.
Right.
Not really looking for groups just
Right.
yet.
Just yet. Right.
Or at least not so much the groups, but I don't really want to sit in a public space with 100 people milling around,
Right. Yeah.
whatever, library.
Well, and you heard, I'm sure you heard Nano has pulled the plug on live events again this year.
Yep.
And I pretty much take my guidance from them when it comes to my writing community. I'm like, okay, that sounds like I'm not being nuts for not going live yet. I'll do, a couple more months. We'll see where we're at.
But hopefully in 2022,
we can get
out and meet some actual writers. But what'll be interesting is I'm also going to try to promote my books and my Story Cauldron newsletter locally.
Yeah.
Because it has the newsletter has a local focus.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because the story, I think the local media might be interested in local author writing fantasy stories set in various places in St. Louis and doing research.
Oh, of course.
About, local sites on our newsletter might be not newsworthy, but public
local newsworthy for sure. Local interest.
Local interest, right?
Local interest for sure.
It's possible that doing that and talking to some like some libraries and bookstores about some stuff for my articles and just kind of getting in the mix through my writing, not looking for a writing group, but kind of promoting my writing in a way. I might meet some people, like that's the way you find that, oh wow, you're doing this, we have this
local writer meets local writers,
rather than just finding some random group on Meetup or something. So
would you consider, because you have been an ML before, would you consider creating your own group in St. Louis at this point, or is that not on?
I had a group that I did in Austin that was moderately successful. We did some really cool events, but I don't know how I would promote it here. I don't know enough writers to even tell about it.
Right.
So it'd be really hard. It would be almost like creating a group in a vacuum. So I think I would need to do more networking with writers locally
first
before I could ever do that. But nothing's off the table on that. Although I will say that, as you will know, writing a group is very time consuming. It does have a way of interfering with the writing, because you got to have the thing for the people next week, just like writing a newsletter some ways, like when you're accountable to somebody else for something, that always is going to take priority if you're a responsible person over your own. You're like, oh yeah, I was going to do that event next week, but I got really deep into my writing.
Right. So never happens.
That's just that
never happens.
Flaky, right?
Yeah.
So I'm a little hesitant to be too generous with my time right now, because I'm really trying to get my own stuff done. And I have so many things, because I'm essentially writing 2 newsletters and a novel.
Right.
And I still have paid work that I do. And I have other, obligations. And that's a lot to juggle.
Absolutely.
So, right now I have to do my final revisions on the novel that's going live in a couple weeks. And I have to write an article for next week's newsletter. And I have to write an article for the paid subscribers who don't get the next chapter. You're like, I have 2 newsletters basically right for next week. That's a lot of
it's a lot of output already. Yeah.
So I'm like, do I have room to then, and I have an event to organize? I don't think I have space for that right now. So
no, I of course completely understand. That's why I asked, because I know for some people, when you ask, would you be willing to create a writing community, it's more about not feeling comfortable in the leadership role. And I know that you already have that comfort, you've done that, but there are other things to consider. And I think it's important for people to understand that yes, everybody I think that's listening has the capability to start their own writing community if they can't find one. However, there are things to consider. And that's you've just pointed out a really great point. You and I have had this conversation about how I have been feeling very much like so much of my own writing has been on the back burner because I'm showing up in all these other ways. So I need to really find a balance. You know, I did not know Happy Campers was going to be such a great need and success for us last year. You know, when I did it in April, it was a 1 month experiment, and I almost pulled the plug when the lockdown happened. And then we had our 1 month and we were like, we need more. And we just kept doing that. So it's a joy. It's absolutely wonderful, but I'm still trying to figure out how to do exactly what you said, the juggle of showing up for others and then also showing up for my personal projects. So I don't want to keep you like crazy long, because we, of course, everyone should know that when Jackie and I get together, we never shut up. So we talked a lot before I pressed record. But one thing that I have been trying to ask everybody is, what is your definition of writing community? Like, what is writing community to you?
I think having people that understand what it's like to be a writer is really important in every writer's life. And for some people, that is being in a physical group of writers, whether it's online or virtual. For some people, it might just be having family or friends that are really supportive. But I think you have to have people that get it. For me, my family is very supportive, and the friends that I have that aren't writers, but they don't get it. They don't really know what it means.
Right.
They're like, oh, you're writing the novel in over the weekend. I'll leave you alone. Like, they can do that, but they don't really know why. So I think it's really nice to be around people that get it. And I think beyond that, if you can actually find a group of writers, I think having people who can share ideas, who can be supportive when things are tough, who can be celebratory when things go well. I think to our fellow happy camper Jennifer, we were talking about it the other day. She was really down on her writing. She's a relatively new writer. She was down on her writing, and we're like, keep going, you're okay, you got this. And then like the next day,
Like, it was so
getting
soon
published, right?
She gets the acceptance. It's like,
and
what?
So I think that's really where the value of writing community is. So it's not a definition. It's just, having a group of people who get the highs and the lows, and that that you can turn to when you like, I'm really stuck on something. Oh, here's a suggestion. Here's a book. Here's a video. Here's a friendly ear if you want to chat and walk through it. I mean, I came up with what I'm writing right now for my newsletter because another one of the happy campers, Heather, sent me a message about something. I can't remember what she said now. And I was responding to her. This is over Marco Polo. So I was talking and I was like, blah, blah, blah. And I should write. And then something as I was talking, oh, my next article should be about this. And I hadn't even thought, so like I talked through, and it's just having that space to just sort of talk about it, came up with the idea of what I wanted to do next.
Right.
And so I think having people that you can bounce ideas off of or who can help you with that is so valuable as a writer, because we get stuck in our heads. I mean, we're in our heads so much of the time when we're writing. Even when you write with somebody else, you're still stuck in your head when you're putting the words down. And I think expanding it to other people and sharing that process with people to some level is so valuable. And I don't think I really understood that even when I was in Austin, because most of my writing community was just hanging out with writers. And it was just sharing a social space, going to Starbucks and sitting across from each other and writing, and then chatting for a bit and then going back to writing, going to a retreat, like that was what we did. That was a very different kind, and then having some workshops or something, very different kind of community than what we have, which is more of an integrated, one-to-one, let's have chats, let's write together, let's talk about problems together. Like we are much more engaged in the writing process as a group. And I think that is so valuable. And if people who don't have that are listening going, God, I really want that. I mean, NaNoWriMo is a great place to start, even though we'll be virtual this year. you can still at least start having those kinds of conversations.
Yes.
And if your local area has a group, I mean, you start somewhere. I mean, it took me a few years to find this group and really feel like I have a spot and have a writing group, and I have a handful of people within the group that are reading my stuff and giving me feedback. Not everybody, right? But enough people that it makes it worthwhile. I really wanted that and I craved it. And when you read a novel from somebody famous and you read in their acknowledgments, and thanks to name, and they're all authors that you also read, and you're like, I want to be in the group with all those
right.
people, right?
I want my people.
And so that's what I was really looking for. And right now, if I say thanks to Nicole Rivera, well, nobody knows who Nicole Rivera is outside of Stop Writing Alone because you haven't published yet.
Right.
But 5 years from now, somebody reads my book and like, thanks to Nicole Rivera, and they're like, oh my God, I love her.
Right.
I get to be in a group with Nicole, right? Or whatever, right? Because hopefully we will have all grown, the rising tide floats all boats. Hopefully all of us have become successful and we've published, in a few years, maybe not everybody, but a bunch of people.
Right.
And when we acknowledge each other in our books, then, our fans will be like, I've read all their books too. Right. I think that's how that works. I mean, at least I hope so. And so, that's what I was craving, is not to have a community of published authors, friends, but a group of people who were writers who were doing something good because they're published, right? They're not just random people. And so, I really appreciate this group for that. And I think, my wish is that everybody who is listening has the opportunity at some point to find that. And if you're looking for it, and to at least recognize the value of it if the opportunity comes along.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's like not my whole point for being here. It's out there. It can be done, and you can do it yourself if the time and everything is right for you, but it's so worthwhile. So worthwhile.
Absolutely.
Jackie, this has been great. I have been asking everyone. I do think I may know your answer. We have 5 different types of meetings that we do per week in Happy Campers. Is there one that has been most valuable to you over the course?
Totally know the answer to this. It's the writing prompt party.
Yeah.
I love the writing prompt party. I don't think I have missed a single writing prompt party that you've done since day one. And again, it's the on the spot writing and the sharing, which is really great. But I will say, for people who don't want to do the writing prompt parties or can't, the NYC Midnight Contest has also been in some ways
a lot of us. Yeah.
And those are contests where you get a genre and a word or whatever. You get basically a prompt, and you have a limited amount of time, depending on the contest, 24 hours, 48 hours, whatever, to write the story. And I think walking into a writing experience with a time limit and a need to have produced something is a really good exercise. And I would encourage people to find those opportunities when they can, because that's when I've written my best stuff. Same. If I sit down, if I right now were to go online and find a writing prompt and write a story, it would be okay. But if I'm in a writing prompt party and I have 20 minutes or 15 minutes to write a short story, I may not finish it in that time, but I will get something good, because it's just like your brain.
You show up. You show up. Yeah.
And the NYC Midnight ones, the flash fiction I've written for those are two of my favorite short stories I've ever written.
Yeah.
Just because I had 48 hours to turn in something that was impossible. I mean, how the hell do you write a story that the location is a landfill? I'm sorry. And I thought I had a story with a submarine.
I was just going to say, why is the landfill worse than the submarine?
I mean, what do you do in a landfill? There's nothing but trash, right? Like, so it's really
But
hard.
Trash is everything.
But you know what I'm saying?
Literally everything.
Like, how do you get there, and how do you, so it was a challenge.
See, you know what it is? I grew up on Staten Island. How do I get there? I walk down the block. There was a landfill right down the block for me my whole life. So it's just like part of my background. Submarines I don't see too often.
But I find that having that time limit, having that pressure, you have to do something, you have to write it, you have to finish it, you have to get it done, is such a motivator. I mean, that's why, the Kindle Vella deadline was helpful. Having those deadlines, having that, And so the writing prompt party is a sort of a microcosm of that, right?
Yeah.
You have a deadline, you have to write something, and you could just sit
and the
there.
audience is waiting. To go back to your point about like having readers helps when we all show up at the writing prompt party. We are each other's audience. We are writing for people that are waiting.
Right.
And I think
I didn't do it. I just had no idea, but who wants to be that person? No, exactly. You're going to write something,
Yeah. And I think it really, even just re-listening to your story as we're in this conversation, the writing prompt party was like the perfect treatment for what was ailing you when we met. That lack of confidence of getting to the end. It's just like perfection doesn't matter here. Just showing up and finishing something is what matters, because somebody wants to hear what you can create. And we're all in first draft fiction mode there. We all know that what we have just written can be better, but it's almost perfect in that moment that we write it.
You remind me by saying that we were talking before we started the interview about my Instagram, and we're going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about it. For the past few weeks, I've been doing these drawings on my Instagram because this guy that I met who's like, I couldn't draw at all 5 years ago, and now is just an amazing artist. It's like, I just started drawing every day, and it's like go to Reddit and do the other things and like find places where people have photos and whatever. So I've been drawing, and when I draw, I'm not an artist. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not trained. And I think my drawings suck. And I mean, a couple of them aren't bad, but I mean, like some of them I'm just like rolling my eyes, but I've been posting them on Instagram and Facebook. And a couple of my friends have been like, you're really getting good. And this is really, and I'm going, oh my God, they're terrible. But it's the same thing with like the writing prompt party. Like some of the stuff I've written, I'm like, oh my God, that was so bad. But when I've read it, or when I share my image, my drawings, people are like, oh, wow, I really like that. And sometimes like, everybody's just being supportive, but when they're specific about it, like, I really like your shading. You're like, why would you say that? I think my shading sucks, but it's not just somebody, giving you props. I think we are our own worst critics. And I think sometimes we, going back to the whole idea of perfection, we are so determined to be perfect, but what is perfect? And being just good enough may actually be seemingly perfect to somebody else, right? Like, I think the writing prompt part helped me realize that, I just wrote a piece of garbage here. This is terrible. I will never do anything with this, but I'll read it anyway because we're on the call, right?
Right.
And somebody, and people start laughing and they're like, oh my God, that was amazing.
Yes.
And you're like, wait,
what?
And people don't say that every single time.
Not every time.
Like so when you write the thing and people actually have a response and you're like, oh, really? Maybe that didn't suck, right? And it's just this idea that, we are our worst critics, and sometimes that can be such a hindrance to us moving forward because we think everything we do sucks. It's the whole Ira Glass, the gap. We have this idea in our head of what's great, and our work may not meet
our
that.
taste exceeds our talent.
Right. But I think the writing prompt parties for me just helped me get past that and go, maybe I don't suck, but also maybe my early stuff that I think needs hours of work doesn't need hours of work. Right. Maybe it just needs a little
Let me give myself credit for what I'm doing right.
Exactly.
Instead of just looking at everything that needs to be fixed. We're really good at finding all our mistakes.
Right.
And then we get bogged down by the heaviness of there's so much to be done. Writing prompt parties are like the perfect place to really even learn what you're doing right, because sometimes you can't identify it until somebody else says it. So yeah, I love that. I knew that was going to be your answer. I figured, but I said, let me just ask just in case I'm not.
And I think about like, where I got stuck with getting through that, like act 2 to act 3 and coming up. It's like, always, I've got to come up with a really good ending. And I have to say that I was very proud of my first book ending, that's on my Substack. But, looking at it, it's not brilliant. It's not like,
here we go, being your own worst critic again.
No, I'm like, isn't, just objectively, it isn't the most brilliant ending of all time, and there's a few flaws. A couple people said, well, but really, but I'm like, you know what? It's good enough. It's
Yeah.
an ending that makes sense, that was kind of clever, I think. And it works with the characters, it works with the story. It wasn't the, oh my God, I didn't see that coming
Yes, right, right.
ending,
But not
that's
every book has
okay.
to end that way anyway, right?
Right.
I mean, like,
So, it's like, okay, it's complete. The story is over. The arc is, all the things have been boxes have been checked. It's satisfying, and it's like, wow, really? They don't have to be that hard.
right,
Like writing doesn't have to be this, agony of, everything has to be exactly right. It's like
right.
it, and like I say, that's where the writing prop party really shines for me, is like letting me realize, just let go,
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
okay.
yeah. That's great. And I thank you for coming all the time because it's just been a joy. It's always a joy to do the writing prompt. I love doing writing prompts, but it's one of my great joys of them is doing a writing prompt and then hearing somebody else's interpretation of a writing prompt and being like, where did that come from? And then somebody else's, and it's just
Oh, that's
wonderful.
super fun. It's
Yeah.
super.
So Jackie, just real quick, where can everybody find you and find all your writing and connect? So yeah, so that they can be a part of your first followers dancing crew.
The main place people can find me would be on my Substack, which is storycauldron.substack.com. Like story and then cauldron, like, the big bubbly pot, .substack.com. And on there, I have my newsletter, and you can sign up. You can also sign up for the paid newsletter to get my novels. But if you go to the main sort of page, I mean, it'll give you a little subscribe box first, and they'll say, let me read it first. And then you go to that. I have links to, I believe I have a link to my novel there, as well as my Substack novels. And then JackieDana.com has some of my, professional work and some of my other stuff, and everything sort of links together. And if you're wanting to see my really terrible drawings, we talked about this. I'm on Instagram at Cocteau32, and that's COCTEAU, like Jean Cocteau 32,
Okay.
on Instagram.
Yeah, and I'll
But
put links to all of that in the show notes as well. But I know some people just like to listen and not
yeah,
look up.
but yeah, I mean, for really, my Substack is really what I'm promoting, because it's like where I'm doing all of my writing and all of my exploring, and where I want people to reach out and comment and, talk to me. One thing that I have a real problem with so much of fiction nowadays is that it's a one-way street.
Mm,
And one of the reasons I don't like Kindle Vella is there's no opportunity for audience
there's no
engagement
communication.
whatsoever.
Yeah.
And so I feel like if I'm writing stuff kind of now, it's not like it's done and dusted and published. If I'm in the process, there's no reason why I can't hear from people who are reading it and interact with them. And so that's what I really like about Substack,
Yeah.
that possibility. And I haven't utilized it to the best of its ability yet. And that's what I'm hoping to do with the second book. So if this sounds exciting to you as a dear listener, if this sounds exciting and you want to try, I would love to hear, join the experiment with me, and
Yeah.
let's, try it out. Even with the free stuff, if I write an article that resonates, or some information about it, or you want to contribute, Substack allows for that in a
Yeah.
nice way, and,
Cool.
with the comments. So, yeah. So that's what I
That's
really
great.
want people to do is, not just come and read, but tell me what you think, or tell me your own experience.
Yeah.
Is there a place that you went in your hometown that just captivates you for totally illogical reasons? I want to hear about it, right? Or whatever. So
Perfect. Perfect. It sounds like you don't want to write alone out there,
I
Jackie.
don't. I think that's the whole thing. Yeah, I like Substack because it's like
I feel like out of everybody, you always serve it up for me. You just always say something that takes me right to the stop writing alone. Jackie, thank you so much. We talk all the time, but I'm sure we'll be back again here on Stop Writing Alone. Perhaps to delve more into Substack to help writers who may want to explore it, but also just to get updated on what's going on with you. But thank you so much for today, and I'll be talking to you soon.
Sounds great. Thanks, Nicole.